colleagues, and students. Thank you very much, and it's a great opportunity, and I thank CHS and Education Reflexive to give me an opportunity to share some of my ideas with you. And at this moment of intellectual arrogance and culture of narcissism, to get an opportunity to deliver a lecture, and that too organized in memory of a person like Professor J.P. Naik, it's a moment of humility, and it's a moment of humbleness. Because the moment we hear the word J.P. Naik, what immediately comes to our mind is an extraordinary life trajectory. Never did he forget his roots. Born and brought up in a rural household in Odisha, and through his talent, intelligence, and eternal urge to learn and to expand his horizon and to contribute something meaningful to the domain of education and take education to the periphery. That was the spirit of J.P. Naik, and that's why his involvement in the freedom struggle, enforced by no less than Gandhi, and as an educationist, growing up in an environment where people like Gandhi and Tagore lived and generated a lot of ideas. And then as an institution builder, as an educational activist, as a thinker, writer, philosopher, his extraordinarily huge landscape, educational landscape that he created, that itself was simply amazing. Right from his engagement with UNESCO, involvement in spreading universal elementary education across the country, and then his active role in the making of some of the brilliant educational institutions, including NCERT and even JB, and his active role in the formulation of the Education Commission, which is popularly known as the Kothari Commission Report on Education, and the Institute of Education that he established, and then at Kolhapur in Odisha, his initiative for that integration, which we all dream of, but which we often miss because of the exclusion of the privileged metropolitan intellectual class. The link between education, intelligentsia, and the rural community and development. And that was a kind of initiative that he took. So when you look at it, reflect on that, and when History Center and the Education Records Unit does a lot of research, keeping the legacy of a man like J.P. Naik in mind. And a simply ordinary humble teacher like me gets an opportunity to come here and to share some of my ideas with you. It's an extraordinary moment. It is a moment of humility and humbleness. And I thank all of you. There's no written speech here, and one of the reasons why there is no written speech is that, as the expression that Gandhi often used about gentle anarchy. Sometimes I look at myself, as someone adhering to some kind of gentle anarchy. So there is no written word. And with certain belief in destructuration, I tend to believe sometimes you begin to make sense if you do not allow your spontaneity to be blocked. And if you allow the spontaneity to prevail, and if ideas begin to flow the way the river flows, then possibly we become more authentic rather than a very ready-made, structured paper. Paper I would write later. But right now, in this beautiful gathering, let me share some of my ideas with you. The way the tree whispers and the river talks to us. So it's a flow of ideas. I will make innumerable mistakes in my presentation, and you would forgive me, but at the end of the day, let's hope some kind of a meaningful conversation begins to take place. Let me begin with 3 quick points. The first point, the title of that thing, the meaning of being a wanderer. I have always believed, and this is not something that I have learned from the book, the very act of studentship, and I believe that teaching is the most important studentship. The moment a teacher ceases to be a student, he or she begins to fall. And teaching is the ultimate test of studentship. And I've always believed that as students, we are eternal seekers. We are continually walking and traveling. And as a result, we never arrive. And I would retire within 3 years. But one thing I can say with certainty about my absolute uncertainty, because I have never arrived. It's an ongoing walk and journey. And it is in that sense, I believe, the experience of walking and the experience of being a wanderer with surprise, unresolved paradoxes, ambiguities, falling down, again trying to rise up. That's the journey. And that's why I would often argue that to engage in an act of teaching is essentially to engage in an act of permanent studentship. And to engage in an act of studentship is to be essentially a wanderer, a walker. And it is in that sense, every moment, every day becomes alive, new, with possibilities. So every morning when I come to the class, it has its own freshness. Even if for the 20th time I am teaching Immanuel Durkheim's elementary forms of religious life, that day, that lecture, that class is unique, has its own possibility, has its own meaning. It evolves and grows every day. That's why, apart from being fossilized and dead, teaching is essentially a living experience. It is a living reality and a living experience. Last month I was at my hometown, and my hometown is adjacent to the border, Bangladesh. The river that flows through my town, that river also goes to Bangladesh. And I just came near the border side, just 4-kilometer walk from my town. And I felt that from the both sides, I saw the border security forces from India and Bangladesh. And I know that even the same river that I see every day, the same river is flowing through Bangladesh. I cannot go there, and I cannot take bath in that river. Even the mango tree, and my hometown is known for mangoes, and even the mango tree that I see at that side, I just cannot go, you know. But suddenly I saw that there is a bird which was there, this part of the subcontinent, that is India, on a tree, and suddenly the birds began to fly, and then birds crossed the border, and birds came to another tree which is in Bangladesh. And immediately at that moment, we begin to feel, you know, is the bird, you know, can the human learn something from the bird? And is it the reason that human could not learn something from the bird which has no border, which could fly? Was it the reason that led a gifted Urdu writer like Sadat Hasan Mantu to narrate the story of Toba Dixie? And is it that the madness of Toba Dixie, in that madness of Toba Dixie lies an extreme politics of violence, and the bird flying and crossing the border, trying to teach us some of the lessons? And I immediately felt, next year when I come to the university and come to the class, no matter what subject I teach, can I begin the class with a story of this kind? The point that I am trying to argue, that we do not just teach sociology, physics, political science, history. In the act of teaching, we give some part of our soul, some part of our being. And that's the living reality. And that's the point with which I just first pointed in. And that's why I gave this title, the experience of being wandered. Second, I would say that it's a beautiful gathering today, and a very non-violent gathering. But just go outside jail and see the world that we live in today. And all of you would agree with me, and that's the context in which we are speaking today. We live in an extremely violent world. We live in an extremely violent world. And when our political leaders, you know, on 2nd October or 30th January at the Rajghat, as a matter of routine, delivered the speech and say that ours is the land of Gandhi and Buddha, that's the biggest joke. That's the biggest lie one could imagine. It's not that land. It is an extremely violent society we live in. And this violence, which I would call the larger macro domain of violence in the national domain, and its three manifestations, or the three reasons that we could see in the following three manifestations. One is that we are finding ourselves at a time when a language of nationalism, which is essentially militaristic, hyper-masculine and religious, hyper-masculine, militaristic, religious nationalism, where the aggression and the violence and the division and the duality is its subtext. This nationalism cannot be imagined without war. Without war, not only with the other state, but the war in everyday life, in aggression, in bruteness, in violence. And it is this ideology of nationalism, which I would say that a very militaristic, religious, hyper-masculine nationalism. And in violence, we could see all around. And the second expression, or the reason of violence that we see, is what I would regard as a very instrumental, technocratic rationality implicit in the developmentalism, implicit in the project of developmentalism. A reason, a rationality which is essentially technocratic, instrumental, and often being legitimated and justified through the discourse of development. So a very technocratic, instrumental developmentalism, causing a huge violence in the way we look at nature, we look at ourselves, and we look at society. And then the third, I think, which is implicit in the doctrine of neoliberal capitalism, and which I would argue that essential personality that it seeks to create, which is characterized by social Darwinism and the logic of the survival of the fittest. So it's a rare race. It's a constant race, and we are all the time in a hurry. There is no moment of contemplation. There is no moment of looking back. We are all trying to win. And it was therefore not surprising that our Prime Minister could popularize such an extremely violent metaphor when he would even talk about children writing the board exam, and he would regard them as exam warriors. So the war, the war and the race and this violence in our life, that's the violence we breathe and we live. This violence is on the television channels. This violence is in the social media, and this violence is in the street. When the other day, after that incident, I was walking through Connaught Place, and I saw young and old people of my age too, well-fed, well-clothed, English-speaking people with the banners and the posters in a demonstration that if they killed 40, killed 4,000. The banner, the poster. And at that moment, there is only one question that haunts me, that is it something to do, relationship between the micro domain of education and also this macro domain of violence. Now, all of them came to schools, colleges, universities, and some of them might have, what the education system regards as a success story. First division, first class, gold medalist, and there with the banner. And the language that they speak is the language of aggression, brutality, and violence. At that moment, as a teacher, as a student, when I looked at that demonstration, one question that comes to my mind is that, is there something that we ought to reflect on the practice of education? Or is there certain, and that's the difficult question I wish to ask, on which I wish to throw light in this lecture, is there some kind of relationship between the micro domain of violence in our classrooms and the larger macro domain of violence, of militarism, aggressive nationalism, technocratic instrumental rationality, and social Darwinism? Now, is it also related, reproduced in certain way in our classroom, in schools, colleges, universities? The way knowledges are disseminated, the kind of engagement that takes place between the teacher and the students, the way we perceive knowledge, the meaning that we attach to knowledge, and the entire process of dissemination and transaction of ideas. Is it that this microdomain of violence, which repeats itself through, what a man like Foucault would have regarded as examination as ceremonies of art, the normalization of surveillance, and the constant normalizing judge, objectification, hierarchization, classification, and normalization, which becomes such an integral part of our educational experience and the learning experience. Now, is this micro-domain of violence have to be thought about, or should we only critique the macro-domain of violence? Can the critique of macro-domain of violence be really authentic if we do not look at the small incidents of violence that have entered in our classrooms, in our families, in our neighborhood, in our everyday life? And it is in that context, I believe, that education is essential, or teaching is essentially an experience of building a bridge between the self and the world, between the classroom and the larger society. And it is in that context, I just wish to share certain ideas with you with a reasonable degree of reflexivity. Now, having made my point, now the context in which I am going to speak. Now, in front of this very intellectually enriched and sophisticated audience, I would just, with a great degree of humility, I would just make three observations again, and I just wish to make you think and reflect on that. And at the end of the day, you will not agree with me, but I believe that it is important to be disturbed by it. It is important to reflect on that. First, and these are three philosophic points and the pedagogic points just I wish to raise. First, as I would argue, that how do we look at growing objectification of the world? Are there limits to objectification? Now, when I ask this question, and I often ask this question, are there limits to objectification? And I know that some of you who have internalized certain kind of scienticism, some of you who have internalized certain kind of positivism or the instrumentality, who thoroughly disagree with me. How dare I critique and I argue that there ought to be limit to objectification? Isn't it what scienticism, the scienticism that grew with Baconian empiricism, Cartesian meditation leading to the duality of the body and the mind, and the reductionism in Newtonian physics, and the evolutionism of Darwinian theory of evolution? Now, if that causes certain kind of objectivity and objectification as a cherished idea, as a cherished methodology of perceiving the world, comprehending the world, and that story of scienticism and positivism became so irresistible that even cultural sciences and the humanities and the social scientists could not resist the temptation of becoming like that kind of science with its objectification and inherent reductionism and fragmentation, causing a perpetual separation between the knower and the knower. And in that duality, and in that separation between the privileged knower with the subjectivity and the disenchanted object as the domain of being known, in that relationship, is there something called extreme form of violence? The way now the knower objectifies the known. And is it the reason that in that entire process there was also an element of disenchantment? Now, is it possible with that mode of objectification to sing in tune with, with what William Wordsworth, in one of his finest poems, would have said, that look at the meddling intellect. It loves to analyze, it loves to dissect, and as a result, the beauteous form, the beauteous nature of things as something evaded from us. is it the reason why, for example, it is no longer possible to sing with William Blake's songs of innocence, and when William Blake writes that my mother sat with me beneath a tree, and looking at the sun above, my mother kissed on my forehead and says that here is the light affirming power of the sun. Now this relatedness, the sun is not just the sun of physics. The sun is also the light affirming power of the sun. And under the tree, with that song of innocence, an engagement is taking place. Now is it that reckless quest and celebration of objectification every day in the way we perceive the world, look at ideas causing a violent mind? And when I ask you to reflect on this question, I urge you, for example, to see that why is it that a great social scientist, sociologist like Zygmunt Bauman, and we will come forward with a book like Modernity and Holocaust and argue that Holocaust, for God's sake, don't think is an aberration in an otherwise good modern times. Holocaust can happen only in the modern time. Holocaust can happen only in the modern age. It's scientism dissociated from ethics. It's reckless objectification and associated process of disenchantment that itself causes a mind, an engineering mindset that is engaged in perpetually calculating and measuring and objectifying data. Why is it that the best engineers, best scientists, and the best accountants coming from the universities in Germany who take part in that massive project of genocide and the Holocaust? And that's the question Zygmunt Bauman asked us. And it's a question that we should entertain. It's a question we should not laugh at. And this question emanates from that anxiety that is there something in that ethos of absolute objectification of the world that inherently causes violence. That's the first part, question that I raise. And it will become clear. Now, if I give you a simple illustration, and I have often shared this example with young students and friends, and that is from a novel, Hermann Hesse's Siddharth novel, one of the path-breaking novels. And now see that Siddharth in quest of a meaning of life and existence, and Siddharth like a wanderer, moving around, roaming from place to place to place. And then Siddharth came near a river. And then Siddharth found an old boatman with a lot of wisdom. And Siddharth asked the boatman that, I just wish to know about the river. And the boatman was utterly surprised. Because the boatman said that for the first time in my life, I am seeing someone who is actually interested in the river. People so far have seen river merely as an object, or river merely as an obstacle to go over. But for the first time, I see someone who is interested in the river. And then, as the novel depicts, then one night, the boatman and Siddharth sat near the river. And they sat for a night, for 2 nights, 3 nights. And they observed and looked at that river with a great deal of wonder. Not in terms of the way a techno-manager would look at the river as merely a resource for hydroelectricity. But the river, they just begin to look at the river. And then, as Hermann Hesse says, that one day, river began to speak. And the river began to speak in many languages and in many colors. And Siddharth began to hear that what the river is speaking, the language that the river is speaking, about its flux and eternity, about its continuity. Now this is where, for example, ways of seeing the river. Now where, as I'm saying, with these references from Zygmunt Bauman and Siddharth, Hermann Hesse, I'm only trying to point out and make you ask a question that we should ask, that are there limits to objectification? Our supervisors are asking us to be objective. Our experts are asking us to be objective. Everybody is asking us to be objective. What is that objectivity? That, I think, is a question that we need to ask and we need to reflect on. But is there, when I speak of the limit to objectivity, it's not that I am indulging into irresponsible subjectivism. I'm speaking of something else. And that's the point just I want you to see, the violence implicit in the objective relation. Second, I would argue, the second point, the obsession with mathematical precision and measurement, and the cult of numbers. Now the obsession with the mathematical precision and the measurement and the cult of numbers, that has played a very important role in causing further disenchantment and in killing human sensibilities. And imagine, for example, the fetish of measurement. And the way today, also in our practice of education, the way we are intoxicated with the scale of measurement. Not only my performance in mathematics should be measured, that whether it is 99 out of 100 or 98 out of 100, even my performance in happiness could be measured, that whether I get A grade or A minus grade in the happiness continuum. My moral health could be measured. Now, this obsession with the measurement and the quantification, and this obsession, as I will argue, is inherently violent. It causes violence because all that is grand, all that is extraordinary, all that is life-affirming and illuminating is beyond measurement. The child's laughter is immeasurable, and the happiness that the child finds when suddenly the child succeeds in knowing that the sum of the three angles of the triangle is 180 degrees. The joy in the child's mind is immeasurable. It is immeasurable. Reading a poem by Kamala Dash, the students of class 12 are spending sleepless nights for writing 2 mark, 4 mark, 6 mark question. And it is one of the poems in the class 12 English PhD literature. Reading that poem with a great moment of relaxation. It's a beautiful poem about Kamala Dash's moment with her aging mother. And reading this poem is a moment of experience. Now, how brutally, how recklessly we destroy that ecstasy of reading a poem into a mere 2 mark questions, and the 4 mark questions, and the 6 mark question. And this mathematical precision and this obsession with the measurement in everything. I just want you to see from both sides, see how it has entered into our knowledge. Those of us who are against Modi would ask him that exactly tell your number, whether it is 300 people you killed or whether it is less. As if we just want to know it's not 300, it is 10 or it is 5. And then they would say, no, it's more than 300. It could be even 500. It could be even 600. In other words, everything in our life, how it has corrupted even the political right. That the way, for example, death and the number, that as if, for example, our radicalism would become somewhat richer if instead of 300 it is 10. And their militant nationalism would be sharpened further if it is more than 350 and 400. So this game of numbers and the way this logic of mathematical precision and the numbers slowly has corrupted even people like us. It is almost like calculating Virat Kohli's yet another sixer and century. So how many more in Kashmir? How many more in that encounter? And it is this growing culture of desensitization and the way in our classrooms, in the way we measure performance, and all that is immeasurable seeks to be devalued, and everything is reduced into a measurement and creating either the euphoria of success or the stigma of failure. And this is where, for example, the point that we just wish to share with you. And the third which I wish to say, and which I believe that Marx captured it so beautifully. And when Marx said, and as I said that, the limits to the understanding of the world and also understanding us as mere resources. And today, we are all becoming resources either for the market or for the nation state. So either we are hyper-masculine nationalists or we are perfectly fitted into the logic of the market. we are resources. And there are limits to that understanding of ourselves and the world as resources. Marx, particularly in his early writing, with his profound spiritual romanticism, could capture this point so well when he could say that look at what has happened, the way capitalism, with its worship of money and the fetish of money, all the heavenly ecstasies have been drowned into the icy water of egoistic calculation. And everything is now the callous cash payment, and which would be further be elaborated in the notion of a commodity fetishism. Now, is it the reason that our best IIM graduates and the products would try to explain their self-worth and define themselves in terms of what the management schools are known for, package and the placement? Am I being sold in 2 crore per annum, almost like in the IPL game, the way the cricketers, like horses, are bought and sold by Priti Zintas and Shah Rukh Khans of the world? Now, this is that how much, what is my price? I remember one day that one of the management institute is graduate got the record-breaking salary, and it was took after lunch. All the television channels, NDTV included, that it was a breaking news. It was a breaking news. The fact that it could be a breaking news, that it's a record-breaking salary that the IIM graduate is getting, that itself speaks of the mood, speaks of the time. How now slowly and slowly we have internalized it, that we are merely resources, and our ultimate worth lies in being successful resources, either for the nation or for the market. I remember that when I was a child, the Bengali primer, written by a great person with extraordinary sensitivity, but still there was one thing, right, which today, at that time I did not realize, but today I think that Parashuna Koreji John Happy Kura those who read, those who study, they ride horses and elephants. Had the author been alive today, in the new edition he would have amended it. They ride Mercedes, and not horses and elephants. Now the question is that, that when you look back, now isn't it that the way every day in our family and in our classrooms, and in the way the parent-teacher meeting, teachers talk about the performance of the children, and the way our success stories are being defined, and where the urge to see ourselves as a marketable resource, or a resource for the nation, is becoming so predominant. And it is so, we breathe it today, we smell it, and it has become so natural that sometimes we even do not notice it. We do not look at it. It has come in a big way in our life, in our thing. So these are the 3 questions that I just wish to raise relating to limit to objectification, limit to quantification and measurement, and limits to that understanding that reduces everything into a mere resource. We are possibilities. We are flower to bloom. We are not just resources. Now, said that, problematize that, now as a wonder, I will just say that it will be my last point, that in that long, constant reflection and elaboration, and all that I'm saying, it's not something that I'm saying something, reading a book and speaking of it. Through studentship, through teaching, through life, through everyday politics, one sees it, feels it, experiences it. Now in that journey, there is also a beautiful story. And that story I just wish to share. Because I do not wish to end this lecture with a pessimistic note. And those stories where there are the 4 travelers have helped me to walk further. And one of the important travelers is of course Rabindranath Tagore. And Rabindranath Tagore has helped me to walk further. And I also see him as a wanderer. And even last night, when I was thinking of this lecture, I was listening to one of his fantastic songs, and it is about a sense of gratitude. And where Tagore says that the fact that I find myself amid this extraordinary universe, amid stars and the planets and the forest and the trees and the sky, that evolves a sense of gratitude. It envelops me, it comes into my being. So it's a prayer. It's a prayer emanating out of that connectedness. Almost like what Walt Whitman would say, to me every inch of space is a miracle. The mountain is a miracle, the sea is a miracle, the fish that swims into the river is a miracle. So it was that sense of gratitude, and with that gratitude, I could immediately feel that it was the reason why he could become so critical, and his heart would cry by confining, when in the name of education, we confine our children to a closed 250 square feet prison cell called the school. And if the child happens to look beyond the window and see a bird coming to the tree, the child is a problematic child. The child is suffering from attention deficiency, and the child gets attacked with it. Is it the reason why in one of the extraordinary short stories, Tagore would depict the agony of a young child like Poti, who lived amid natural abundance in a rural setting and has to be eventually sent to Kolkata and brought in a city school, and his complete inability to cope with that because his arch is the abundance and the school confined him. And eventually the tragedy that Poti could pass through. That, for example, makes us see that wherein lies the heart of Tagore. And that's why I would argue that one of the things that helps me to find a ray of hope in this barren world is that constant companionship with the Tagore and his plea for the aesthetics of learning. And that aesthetics of learning coming out of certain connectedness, not objectification of nature, but the connectedness with the nature. And it is this connectedness with the nature that fights what Weber would have otherwise regarded as the disenchantment of the world. So it is this connectedness. It is this connectedness and the aesthetic of connectedness, and as a result, which in other essay Tagore would explain, man's quest for the surplus, something beyond mere intuitive, merely instrumental, and that urge of communion between the phenomenal and the transcendental. And I think that's, for example, throws certain light and enables me to critique what happens in our life in the field of education and to think of and strive for another possibility. And the second person who helped me to find the ray of hope in this is that Gandhi in Tolstoy farm. And when in South Africa, Gandhi in Tolstoy farm, and the chapter he writes in Experiment with Truth, where Gandhi said it so beautifully and simply that in the Tolstoy farm, when it was established, there are 40 or 50 children, Hindu, Muslim, Parsi children. And it was very difficult to hire teachers because the budget would not permit. And Gandhi said that suddenly I found myself as an adult, as a teacher, and I had to engage with them. And then 3 points in Tolstoy farm in medicine he said, which I believe pedagogically are extremely important. First he says that one of the primary tasks I took for myself is the cultivation of the body. Because my friend, that the body is a carrier of the divine, and the body has to be energized, and the duality of the mental and the manual has to be broken. Intellectual, mental labor, and the manual occupation, that has to be broken. And as he described, there are many trees in the Tolstoy farm, and there was a huge kitchen. So together with me, children have to be involved in the kitchen, or in the gardening, or in the harvesting. And that was the first lesson that I learned, which in 37, Wartha conference with Zakir Hussain, they are talking about the NUEPA and the integral education, integrating the mental and the manual. And the second Gandhi was saying that cultivating the heart. It is so important that I know not merely through the intellect, the heart, the other faculties of mind, the sensitivity is so important. almost like a beautiful poem that Allama Iqbal wrote in terms of a conversation between the brain and the heart. You know, that how the brain and the heart have to continually communicate with one another. You know, nothing is unimportant. So this is why he says the cultivating the heart. And then the third, he says that my increasing skepticism towards a mere textbook-centric learning. And the teacher as just a mediator. And the textbook is the bridge between the teacher and the child. Gandhi said that I was becoming increasingly skeptical about textbook-centric learning. Everyday activity of the teacher, everyday related engagement with the child, that itself, for example, is a major source of learning and a major source of illustration. Now, when Gandhi did talk about, he was bringing certain kind of element of, ethical element in the teacher-taught engagement and the teacher-taught relationships, and the violence that emerges out of that division between the intellect and the physical, intellect and the mental. So he was talking about the integration against the fragmentation. And the third person who helped me to work with this is, of course, Paulo Freire. And Freire's notion of the problem-posing education and the dialogic education. Martin Buber talked about I-thou relationship. And Martin Buber, in one of his lectures, speaks of the communion in terms of an engagement between the teacher and the taught, the spirit of the communion, not the hierarchization and the objectification. Now, Freire, giving a political tone to it, talking about how silences have to be overcome and how we have to regain our language, regain our voices. We are no longer the passive receiver of ideas. We are the active creators of knowledge. We should not allow either the market or the state to reduce us into mere resources. We are the active creators in the process of knowledge making. And the teacher as student, in collaboration with student as teacher, learning is a perpetual process by posing problems and collectively reflecting on these problems. And as a result, the spirit of dialogue as opposed to what we call the monologue sickness that often characterizes our classroom and the learning environment. That, I think, was a great insight, that helps me to see, a possibility. And fourth, I will end with, for example, one of the leading educationists of our time, Ronald Barnett, his reflections on education, the being of university, particularly his reflections on the feasible utopia that he strives for. And he characterized this feasible utopia as the idea of an ecological university. He says that in the 20th century we have seen universities which are in tune with the dominant political group, or the universities which are in tune with the market demands. But it is time, and it is a feasible utopia. Its time has come when we think of ecological university. And the ecological in terms of, again, not objectification and quantification, but in terms of connectedness. So different branches of knowledge, the constant communion with diverse branches of knowledge, and the university as a space, as a learning environment in connectedness with the larger political, ethical, moral reality. Now this is where, for example, this plea for the idea of a new university and the ecological university as opposed to merely what we see these days, education shops, education shops reducing knowledge into merely a techno-managerial skill, devoid of other deeper fundamental questions of life, and it characterizes that new techno-managers with certain kind of skill, but ethically, politically, culturally impoverished. And some of them I saw that day at Connaught Place up to the tragedy. They are technically skilled, but politically, ethically, culturally impoverished. Now this is where, for example, these four persons, just often, as a teacher, as a student, I often converse with them, And I often urge my students to converse with them to find some ray of hope, in this kind of a scenario, and to create, to try our best, at least to make us sensitive, so that our mind becomes more open, involves the cultivation of empathy, understanding, and reduces the degree of the violence that we see all over the world. I will just end with two things, that J.P. Naik, we began, and his time period, 1907 to 1981, he passed through different trajectories in the life of the nation. Gandhi, Tagore, freedom struggle, nationalist movement, the age of Nehru, the age of mission making, the new dreams, the welfare state, socialist dreams. And he also saw emergency, the growth of regionalism and parochialism, and the crumbling of the Nehruvian project and the dream, and the 81 he passed an extraordinary time, and the way he looked at the world reflected on education. But to do honor to J.P. Naik and to the kind of work that this organization, Education and Academy, does, is to keep that legacy. And it is that the time today your generation lives in, young students, and how, for example, J.P. Naik played his own roles, did something extraordinary in the field of education. But you people growing up in your time, how you reflect on your time, another struggle of freedom, the way J.P. Naik engaged in one kind of freedom struggle, and the way you engage in another struggle of freedom. So your time is being characterized in a way, I'm often fond of saying what Herbert Marcuse would have regarded as one-dimensional thought, one-dimensional thinking. And as Marcuse said it really beautifully, that a new kind of authoritarianism would emerge, and that authoritarianism would remain despite parliamentary democracy, despite multiple television channels, and despite innumerable products available in the shopping malls, and despite apparent choices of the consumer. This authoritarianism still remains because it conditions the mind. It makes the mind one-dimensional. It transforms man into a greedy consumer. Now we are all consumers these days. And as consumers of both material and the symbolic products, we are engaged in an act of violence. And that's why it is not surprising that if you look at the newspaper today, this morning I just saw Indian Express. Indian Express is earning, I call newspaper a lot of money. Out of 16 pages, 8 pages are ad. So left side is Modi, right side is Arvind Kejriwal. Next side is Modi, right side is Arvind Kejriwal. Politics as a product, politics as a product, and the growing cult of narcissism, which is so against the essential ethics of democratization. Modi in petrol pump, Modi in gas station, Modi in railway ad, Modi everywhere. Now it is very difficult to recall the name, who is the railway minister, or who is the processing minister. It's very difficult to recall the name. It's around pervading, everywhere. So the ethos of democracy, ethos of our agency, that is being systematically eroded and destroyed. And it is here, as Marcuse would have said it so beautifully, that a new form of totalitarianism is emerging in our time. And Marcuse wrote it in the 60s. And like a prophetic thinker, I believe that it relevance we are realizing in 2019 India today. And with that massive social media, television network, and the market and the advertising agency. Under those circumstances, you are philosophizing the world, redefining the world, rethinking education. J.P. Naik is an inspiring illustration when it is important that bright JNU students one day would also engage in some of this project to rethink education and to redefine education and to combat the violence that we have almost taken for granted. I would just end, there is a tune with that, with a poem, Samsul Rahman's, the great Bangladesh poet, is known. And I'm very bad in translation, and I have repeatedly shared it with my student in the class. It's a beautiful poem, and forgive my poor English translation, because poetry cannot be translated, So it's like that the poet says, for ages, and it's the experience of being a wanderer, and that's why I end with this poem. He says, for ages I am searching a poem. I have not yet found my poem. And in search of my poem, I approach an old banyan tree. And the tree whispers into my ears, and the tree tells that the dear poet, if you really wish to find your poem, enter deep, deep into my roots. And if you enter deep into my roots, you will find your poem. For ages I am searching the poem. This time I approach a broken wall. And that wall tells me that enter into every dust particle of the wall. And then you would find your poem. And for ages, I'm searching the poem, and now I approach an old woman with a wrinkled face. And now she tells that you would find your poem if you could understand the every fold of my wrinkled face. So the banyan tree, the broken wall, and the wrinkled face of the old woman, how long do I walk to find my poem? That's the meaning of being a wanderer. And that's the spirit of what I would call liberating education. Thank you very much for hearing my nonsense.